against sexual harassment while working for Canadian Forces Base North Bay ultimately led to a Supreme Court decision that employers are responsible for maintaining a safe, respectful, harassment-free workplace. After a string of dead-end jobs, mother of 5, Robichaud was the first hired by National Defence back in 1977 to work as a cleaner, a unionized position represented by UNDE that offered steady pay and benefits. However, a few weeks after being hired, her supervisor began to sexually harass her, and attempts to avoid him or tell him to stop were unsuccessful. After her probationary period, she filed a grievance with her superiors, and they actually told her she was the first person to ever complain. To which Bonnie replied, "Well, good then. It should be easy to fix." Bonnie started a grassroots campaign to reach out to other women in the union and other labor organizations, publishing her own newsletter and ultimately gaining enough supporters along with the National Union of PSAC to support her legal case through the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal, the Canadian Federal Court, and then eventually the Supreme Court of Canada. Her memoir entitled "It Should Be Easy to Fix," describing all of her efforts here, was published in 2022. Please give a very warm welcome to Sister Bonnie Robichaud.
I thank you very much, and you have no idea how privileged I feel to be here. My role in the union was not as happy as it could have been. Even though shortly after I was hired, I ran for a position on the executive, and in the following year again, and was successful. But once I made my complaint, all bets were off. I didn't really understand how the military was such a, I don't know why, such a male-dominated place. I didn't think that the work that I did should have anything to do with what my sex was. They were entitled to my labor. I provided that. I enjoyed that and wanted to keep this job. A unionized job with better pay, steady hours, pension. Like, I was really, really happy with it. But I wasn't going to tolerate the behavior of the foreman of cleaning services after my probation was over. Although, had my probation been longer, I could not have continued to tolerate it anyway, even at the cost of my job. So once I complained, the speed with which he and the military wanted me fired, you know, they built a file on you, was lightning. And before I wrote the book, I used to say to one of my children, I says, "Well, I wonder why they didn't fire me." Well, once I wrote the book, I realized I wouldn't let them. With 5 young children at home, and you know, it's hard to be home full-time, 24/7 with 5 young children. My husband was very supportive. He did lots of things too that needed to be done because there's plenty of work. But going out to work was really good for my mental health. At that time, with only a high school education and more education wasn't an option because I was from a large family and didn't have even the confidence to say that I wanted it. It was very hard to get a good job, and at that time you looked in the paper and you saw an ad and said, okay, I'll go be a chambermaid in the motel. That was good. I could work all day and not have to deal with, he's hitting me, wipe my mom, I want a drink. So, hey, this was really good. So, and then I got a job as short order cook. They only wanted you whenever they wanted you. There's no steady hours, and they sent you home when they figured they got enough work out of you. So that was not all that good either. So when I applied at I applied through Employment Canada, and she had some more dead-end jobs for me, and I said I wasn't interested. I didn't know that they were only hiring women at the base because the government mandated that women should also be able to have these jobs. Unfortunately, there was a fair bit of resentment by the present employees. Anyways, I did my job. A year later, there was an opportunity for a promotion, and I figured, I'm gonna apply, and if I don't get it, well, I've tried. I did get it. I was very high up because the man, there were 2 openings. The other man had 25 extra points for being ex-military. So, but what happened, I was the only woman that applied. I figured eventually the men would get used to me supervising. But the reality is I was never given the authority to do the job. I mean, years later, I got a job at Public Works. I was given the authority to do that job the day I went to work. And that's the big difference. It wasn't my fault that I wasn't given the authority to do the job. It was the fault of the employer. So, anyways, the first 4 months was climbing the mountain. And then the foreman started the sexual harassment, asking me about my sex life and wanting me. The guy was such a jerk. Like he called me in the office. I think he wanted to be a porn star with a fully erect penis and asked me if I'd like a piece of tail. Yeah, well, he knew I'm a married woman. He knew that I have children. But they also know or count on the fact that married women don't talk. Well, this married woman definitely does talk.
Yeah.
So he even had me coming to the office. I'd start work at 7:30. I'd be there from 7:30 and 8 o'clock. He came in and just harassed me and asked me more questions and did all that stuff. He wanted me to rent the hotel room. He wanted me to go on the birth control pill so that he wouldn't get me pregnant. So I should go to the doctor and get a birth control pill so he could rape me. You know, he looked at me like I had no clothes on. And so when my 6-month probation was up, I said, I've got to complain. I told him before he went on vacation, there's no way on earth that I'm going to tolerate this any longer. Well, I guess he didn't agree with what I said. He came back from his vacation and started it again as though I had said nothing. I guarantee you his memory wasn't that bad. Then I went to a language training test in Toronto. I came back and they'd already set up the letters of complaint and the petition against me. So his speed at trying to get rid of me left me in no doubt that I better fight back. And again, like I said, I didn't let them fire me. There's no reason why I couldn't do the job of cleaning, vacuuming, cleaning toilets, doing whatever I had to do, and supervising the people that I had to supervise. But he decided, by the way, most of the letters came from him, the area foreman. I think there were maybe 2 or 3 cleaners that put a letter in that didn't want me to supervise them. So then I went on my holidays, and guess what I did when I went on my holidays? We had a trailer night and the 5 kids and me, and I don't even remember about the kids, but I must have taken them with me. I was chopping wood. Well, that was his head coming off every time. So I never used any derogatory terms against him, because if I said he was a jerk or other words like that, that I would feel inside. So I never did that. I wrote a lot of things. I wrote down when he did what he did. He would phone me anytime he wanted to at home. He would phone me in the morning and tell me I was late for work. Well, I wouldn't start till 7:30 anyway, and he'd phone me at 7 o'clock. He knew all this stuff. But I figured, too bad, I'm not giving up. And so when he wouldn't stop, I just wanted him to stop. Give him 20, 30 days of leave without pay. You know, I wasn't out to get him, shall we say. I was out to protect myself. Well, it's just like a steel door came down once my complaint went in. And I went to coffee break, everybody left. That was a shock. I wasn't the most popular person in town, but I sure as heck, people didn't leave when I entered the room. My local steward, my local executive, did not. They beat a path to his door to represent him. And there were many years in the union where they said, we can't represent member against member. Well, all the members are paying dues, and so was I. So that was a big, big struggle. So I saw an article in the paper about sexual harassment, so I figured, okay, who do I write this letter to? I figured the Ontario Human Rights. I'm an Ontario citizen, put it to the Ontario Human Rights. They forwarded that to the federal, and I had to then go to Public Service Commission. And for anybody that doesn't know, their main role is to keep things quiet, for you not to say anything. They feel like your friend because the enemies are really out there, but they're really not. It wouldn't have taken them 6 years to help solve this complaint. For them to finally say, okay, we better sit down with Mrs. Robichaud. She's got leave to the Supreme Court of Canada, so, you know, we better talk to her because we want her off the work site. We couldn't fire her, so we have to do something else. So my complaint went there, and then they want an explanation. They got 3 pages. I type everything. The more I write, the sloppier my handwriting gets, and I figured I don't want them to see that. 3 pages of single-spaced for a long legal paper. Off I sent it. Oh, this isn't enough. All right, I sent them some more. Oh, we want some more. I says, too bad, it's all you're getting. Because, again, I didn't understand that the system was to wear you out. But in the end, which it all seemed very long at the time, they said it'll go to tribunal. And this is also really important. They said, they always blame the victim. How could Mrs. Robichaud have waited so long to complain, knowing fully well it would mean immediate dismissal if she could prove it? How could they know what I knew? I sure as heck didn't know it. And so I got my grievance answer, and I went to my lunch break, and I said, okay, I guess I'm going to prove it. Because I didn't know they were all, shall we say, liars, because it didn't matter what they said. They were never going to dismiss him, and it wasn't even what I'd asked for. I just wanted them to take responsibility for it. Well, from there, it went to the Canadian Human Rights Act, and Canadian Human Rights Commission wanted to prove that sexual harassment was an offense under the Canadian Human Rights Act. That's all. What the hell is sexual harassment? Sexual harassment on the discrimination on the basis of sex. Is there anybody who would not have a clue what that is? So I went through months and months and months of stress, still staying on the job, and they got what they wanted after the first tribunal, which was really rough. By the way, after they asked me 3 times how many children I had, after the 3rd time I said, if the number of children changes between now and the time I leave the courtroom, I'll let you know. They didn't ask again. So at the end, the Human Rights Commission got what they wanted. Sexual harassment is discrimination on the basis of sex. Okay, they're happy. Bye-bye, Mrs. Robichaud.
Yeah.
National Defense was happy. We're not guilty. Bye-bye, Mrs. Robichaud. The harasser figured, okay. The chairperson said I must have volunteered. Well, there was nothing in evidence on his knowledge of human sexuality, and I appealed. But when you go outside the authority or whatever of national defense, you got a chance. I appealed it with the same lawyer, who was a very competent, capable lawyer, and won at the review tribunal in 1983. The harasser's still there. He's still my supervisor. He's still giving me a hard time. He had full authority over my work. Well, National Defense figures, hey, we're liable. What the hell are we doing now? They went to the Federal Court of Appeal. That's another 2 years worth of waiting and being given a hard time. So I kept on going, and I don't know, but his lawyer in the Federal Court of Appeal did say, yes, he did sexually harass Mrs. Robichaud. I guess I should be really thrilled that he was found liable. Maybe. I think the biggest liability really was with the employer, and that's who I decided was the most important to go after. Even if I could have gotten the $5,000 fine from him, that means I have to look him in the face again. It wasn't worth the effort, the money, or anything else. So I'll tell you, all this took 6 years. So finally, the Public Service Commission says, well, we better talk to Mrs. Robichaud, because we don't want her working here anymore. Human Resources didn't want me working in here. And so I said, okay, I would not have sat down in the same room with him if on that table was giving up my right to go to the Supreme Court. By the way, Justice McWigan had already put in his dissenting decision that the harasser cannot correct the wrong, only the employer can do it. So I wasn't really in a lot of doubt that I would get a good decision at the Supreme Court. So there they are, dingling a 3-year leave with pay, tuition, and books, and I'd have to give up a lot of stuff. I got to the point where I even put in throwaway complaints because, you know, sooner or later I can do that. Well, somebody had a fight, a cleaner had, they called it an altercation, and I got fired. Well, I wasn't going to put up with that. The PSAC wasn't going to put up with that. And by the way, the PSAC was paying my legal fees. That was wonderful. And that took 4 years though. Meanwhile, I had bought a photocopier. I put out a national newsletter. I organized women's groups and other unions who came to support me at the Federal Court of Appeal. So there was a lot of support. There was a lot of media attention. W5 did a presentation on it. The Toronto Star did full-page things on it. And yet, I was supposed to leave. No, I'm not leaving. So then, after they fired me, they had to rehire me because the Public Service Canada rep had to put in a grievance. And I won. You can't just have some guy who picks a fight with you. Even if they think it's my fault, you can't get fired for that. So I got my job back. They gave me my back pay. They didn't want me to go back on the base. So what? In September, the pay was used up, and I says, I'm going back to work, and nothing short of an injunction will stop me from doing that. So from that time to the middle of October, they finally figured, we've got to get her out of here. I phoned them up. because they wanted me to give up my right to the Supreme Court. And there was nothing in that agreement that could compensate for how important employer liability was. I says, here's your agreement and there's my press release. That one never went to the press. Within 4 hours, they notified me that they had changed the agreement to let me go to the Supreme Court. And of course, the employer was found liable long before you were able to get through that gauntlet while you're still working through the courts, although that could not have been done if it didn't get outside of human rights, of national defense. It would have been impossible. Even after the Supreme Court decision, I wrote national defense and they said, this is our final decision. You weren't sexual, you lose your last grievance. But I figured the Supreme Court had more going for them than their decision. They weren't even good enough to do that. And then I came back, when I went to see my lawyer, I says, I'm going to the review tribunal. Because National Defense did what they could to stop it from going to the Supreme Court. And I said, you didn't hold up your end of the deal, and I'm not holding up mine. It took another 2 years, and what they said is you cannot sign away your human rights by private contract. That's really important because that is certainly at that time, and maybe still, how they try and stop the complaint from going anywhere. They give you a private contract. Human rights fine was only $5,000. I also got sued, by the way. And the woman from the investigator from the Public Service Commission said, he can sue you, you know, he can sue you, you know. And I finally said to her, I'm not going to worry the rest of my life about something that may or may not happen. If it happens, I'll deal with it. And if it doesn't, I have nothing to worry about. So there was a lot of opposition to even hearing about it. I also tried to talk to the military captain about the sexual harassment complaint, but he wouldn't listen. He said, I just got out of a divorce. Well, too bad for you, but I had no support from my local. They kicked me out of the local. Any conference or women's committee I wanted to go to, because I went to every one I could possibly do, went completely on my own money. The newsletter I sent completely on my own money because I bought a photocopier. I don't know what took me so long. And they did try to split my husband and I up, but we didn't split up, we teamed up. So after my 3 years leave with paid tuition and books and going back to the review tribunal, I got a barrister from England who was settling in Kingston, and this was going to be her thesis, and she and 3 other students from law students from Kingston put the complaint through the process. So the most important thing I got from the review tribunal is the non-disclosure, because they figured I would never be able to tell anybody what was in this agreement. They're evil. And they are going through Parliament now, or the Senate, to stop that from happening. Because not only have you suffered for usually years, and then they finally say, okay, you got it, we'll give you this, but you can't tell anybody. No, they shouldn't have the right to do that. They did the wrong. And the person that does the wrong is the one that can't dictate who you talk to. So that was also very important. The meantime, by the way, in the Federal Court of Appeal, there were so many supporters from unions, and so I got to sit in the front. There was not enough room in the courtroom for everyone. And when I asked my lawyer how big the room was, he said, oh, it's big. Well, I didn't realize he meant from floor to ceiling, because it's at least 3 stories high inside the room, give or take. So that was extremely encouraging, but the harasser had not put in his appeal. So then we had to wait some more time. I think, I don't know, that was May, and they started back in September. But I'm going back in the work site to try and work. We're the harasser, still my boss, so the pressure was on. But I'd come this far, and I wasn't giving up. And my lawyer says, if you don't sign this agreement, I won't be your lawyer. And I'm thinking, if I sign this agreement, I won't need a lawyer. So they changed the agreement to allow me to go to the Supreme Court, and he represented me. And that's how that went. I still had to work to make sure I got a job in Ottawa, because where else get a job at the public service capital of Canada? I had more friends in Ottawa than I did in North Bay. So I managed to get the job, went to university. My son says, Mom, he couldn't figure out, why are you working so hard to study? Well, he figured it out, because he did very well, and all my children did very well in their studies. He's now an ear, nose, and throat specialist. My daughter became a lawyer. My son, younger son, because I have 5 children, he was a karate master plus a chiropractor. And my oldest worked for the federal government, who just retired, and doing computer science. And he worked for 32 years. And my youngest moved away. So he's in Alberta and loves the job he's doing. So it didn't ruin my kids, and I was just sorry I wasn't able to spend as much time with them during that time as I would have liked, because I'm from a family of 9, and you don't get a lot of one-on-one time. So my plan was not to have 9 children, have them all before I'm 30, and be able to spend the time. But I guess they learned from example, and wasn't a lot of money to go around, because even if they were, giving them a lot of money or a lot of things wasn't going to build their character. So they didn't get it. If they wanted it, they had to work for it, because wanting it is not enough. So since then, I went to Public Works. I'm sorry to say that I was sexually harassed again. My terms with PSAC, for the contacts I had, weren't as good as I would have liked. And so when my probation was over and I was moved, because I did go to the manager and I did go to the Public Service Commission, he came back to where I was working in a small office with 4 desks, and he was going to get at it again, and I figured, no, it's not going to happen. I'm not on probation. I went into the district office and I told them what was going on. Never wrote a single syllable. A few months later, I don't remember how long it was, because they work in groups. It wasn't just the guy who harassed me, it was his boss and other, because ex-military going to civilian jobs. And they thought they would just carry on. Well, within months, they all retired, the whole gang. And I wasn't quitting that job. I'd left North Bay and bought a house in the Ottawa area, and I wasn't leaving it. And the boss didn't even forward my new address to personnel. And a week after I got the job, they didn't tell me. So I just kept showing up to work. Possession's 9/10 of the law, and I just kept showing up. I was not told that I had that job. And I didn't get the letter because it went to my old address. Well, I signed that letter in a hell of a hurry and was very happy to be working at Public Works, stayed active in my union, was part of the basic education and trainings program, and stayed on my local executive the whole time. I am a union activist. I was a union activist even before I had a union job, because I'd lived in North Bay, my husband was from Sudbury, and I was a strong believer in unions, because they certainly did give me plenty of grounds to make it really hard for them. But you have to remember, a union is a reflection of our society. And I figured it was more important to keep a strong union than to say anything, than to deal with their deficiencies. Anyways, I have no idea how long I've spoken, but I think I've given you a good story. Thank you so much. I love being here, and I love the union support that I've gotten, and I did write a book because the story's too long to tell it all here. And if there are any, I don't know, how is our time? Well, okay, so you can either ask me questions later if that works, and thank you so much for listening, and thank you so much for welcoming me here.